Good afternoon, everyone. We'll start things out just to keep us on time, recognizing that I'm between you and lunch, and I would never stand between someone and their food, ever. So look at the quote up there, because that's something I'd like us to focus on as we're going through the presentation today. Never doubt that a small group of committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. And we are in a place where we need to do something to change the world. I think we're agreed with that, which is why we're all here. So welcome to Quantifying and Reducing the Carbon Footprint of Your IT Infrastructure. I'm Vern. In my day job, I'm with the VMware Cloud team, but I'm also a sustainability ambassador, which allows me to have discussions with customers, with partners, and internally on sustainability, all things sustainability, focusing on reducing carbon footprint, raising awareness of carbon emissions. And today we're going to talk about a number of things that corporations are doing to lower their own carbon emissions. And that also ties in with some financial implications. Interesting thing, the way this came to be, this presentation came to be, is that I was delivering a VMware Cloud disaster recovery workshop. How many are familiar with VCDR to some degree? Yeah, you better put your hand up. I was delivering it to a group of healthcare customers, and VCDR has some intrinsic sustainability elements. And one of the folks stood up and said, "You know, Vern, this is great. Why don't you put together a larger discussion for the British Computer Society?" And so Rory and I actually presented to BCS on this topic. It went over very well. One of the things I asked that group was, how far along is your organization on its sustainability journey? So humor me. Pull out your phones, please. I should have mentioned earlier on this is going to be audience participation, so you don't just all get to sit there. Mamuna, you're not pulling at your phone.
I'll ping it down.
All right. And go ahead and I'll put up the results. I'll keep this up for a second. If you can't capture the QR code, the menti.com code is down there at the bottom, and it's hard to see. It's 94527948. And we'll take a look at the results, because I'm very curious as to see where everyone is in their sustainability journey. You almost look like you're about to ask a question, Rory.
Can you do a subset of what the VMware people say and see if we're at least consistent? Sorry, the VMware by roll call.
We can if we reset it and do it afterwards. So here's what things are looking like. I'll pan over. Okay, wants me to break out of this to go over here. That's fine. Okay, so interesting results. Oh, very good. Making documented progress. We'd like to see that. So everything from starting to acknowledge there's a crisis, and is anyone below the starting to acknowledge there's a crisis and wants to admit it? No? Good. So publish sustainability goals is the next step. Formulating a plan goes very closely with the second bar, but really great to see that making documented progress towards achieving sustainability goals is by far more the common practice. So everyone is mostly along in their sustainability journey, which is really, really good to see. So what we'll talk about is how corporations go through that process to get there. Let me back up. Oh, sorry, did you want to take a shot at that, Rick? Yeah, no worries, no worries. Good. All right, so here's what we'll discuss. Well, just so we are all on the same page, I'll do a very, very brief. These are the challenges so that we know where we're coming from. Then we'll talk about how corporations go about planning to address sustainability challenges. In order to have an effective plan, you need to measure. In fact, the measure and the plan sometimes go hand in hand, because when you plan, one of the questions you'll be asked is, well, where are you right now? What are your carbon emissions? How do you determine what those look like? And so you need to know what to measure and how to measure them. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Once you have your plan, well, there's no point in having a plan if you're not going to execute on the plan. So what are some things to do? We'll cover 4 things that corporations can do and do to mitigate their carbon emissions. Then once you have that, you want to report on them. So we'll talk about what some of the reporting elements are, and finally we'll talk a little bit about a journey. We'll talk about the VMware journey, but not because it's the VMware journey, but because there are elements in it that hopefully you can see helping you out in your own journey. Okay? At any point, feel free to stop me for questions We're a small group, more than happy to have discussions, sidebars. I already know there's going to be some interesting stuff coming up. Rick and I had a conversation last night in the bar. Funny how many things start that way, right? We had this conversation in a bar. Yeah, Paul's nodding, yeah. So feel free. Let's just try to keep on time again with lunch. We have till 1:45. Okay, so let's start talking about the challenges. I like this particular slide, even though the data is slightly old. I'll talk about a more updated one that Rory provided me with. This shows what the IT sector would be if it were a country. So if I realize it's slightly skewed, but if we were a country, we'd be the third largest consumer of electricity across the globe. And look at some of the stats. We consume more than 2% of the world's electricity. That is actually much higher now. It's probably closer to 6. We emit as much CO2 as the airline industry. And we're growing fast. And I think no one is going to argue with the growing fast, with the rise, the continuing rise of AI and ML. Training one of those models, and to put it in perspective, so training Llama 2, which has only 70 billion machine learning parameters, took 196 GPU years and generated 291 tons of CO2. And that's just one model. GPT-4 has 175 trillion parameters. And so it's a very, very real concern. The slide I was mentioning came from a Gartner conference, which Rory attended day before yesterday. And I didn't want to officially put it up, even though I do have the slide hidden, just because Gartner's sometimes a little finicky about that.
They stole the data, you can show it.
You think?
Yeah.
All right.
Go on.
All right then.
It's not their data, they quoted somebody else.
So we're all on the same. Rory said I could. All right, let me unhide the slide. It is actually a good slide. So let's unhide it and show it. Right, so look at the scale here. So like I said, we're somewhere in here. We're more than 2, probably a little less than 6. But by 2040, if this carries on, the IT industry is going to be using 64% of the world's electricity. Clearly, that's not sustainable. I mean, there are already countries that have brownouts, right, and power cycles.
We even have it in the UK.
We
have Octopus, for example, that says if you turn off for this hour, we will pay you. We have shortages now.
I believe it. And of course, we're all incented to do our washing at different hours of the day in order to have a different electricity rate. So it's a real thing. Okay. So where I'm going with this is that if there's something, it's clearly an issue, and anything that we can do corporately to help reduce that, we should at least consider it and take steps towards it. But here's some of the things that are cropping up. So mandated regulatory reporting is a thing now, right? Joe mentioned that just now in the AMA. You're going to be, as a corporation, you're going to be expected, you're going to be mandated to report on your carbon emissions and have those legally, we'll call it legally tracked. And carbon accounting is becoming a big thing, a science in and of its own. Rising energy costs, I don't think any of us can argue with that. If you take a look at your electrical bill from 2 years ago versus today, this just fits perfectly in with that. So there's a pressure to reduce emissions. This is risen to the C level, where we have a number of, many CEOs or CFOs being tasked. In fact, in VMware, Joe mentioned this briefly in a D&I context. We also have a C-level incentive to cut down carbon emissions as part of our 2030 plan, meaning that they get compensated on reduction of emissions. And finally, the growing distributed workforce, 10% world's consumed data. Okay, so we recognize there's a problem. We're all on the same page. What's the plan? How do corporations go ahead and plan? Well, you know what? It would be great just to say, hey, let's turn off all the lights in our office every night and we'll reduce our carbon emissions by 50%. That's great, but it doesn't work that way. Either internally, and many organizations do have a sustainability team that focuses on this, some with PhDs, VMware does. There are also organizations like the Science Based Targets Institute that will help you, and they're not free, but they're very low cost. They will help you set a realistic target. As an example here, here's Nike. So on the side here, and I'm using this just because I can. I know you can all see it, but it's fun to press the little spotlight. Nike, everyone knows Nike, or Nike. They set a target to reduce Scope 1 and Scope 2 greenhouse gas emissions 65% by 2030 from a 2015 baseline, and Scope 3, 30% within the same time frame. So that's an aggressive target, and that's to keep global warming under 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is the aggressive target. For those that are unaware, Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3, just very briefly, Scope 1 emissions are things that you are responsible for as an organization. You are a logistics company, you have lorries crossing back and forth in the country, they burn fuel, that's your Scope 1. You're directly responsible for producing those carbon emissions. Scope 2, especially in the IT world, generally refers to electricity. So you are using electricity from a provider, so you're not producing electricity, and so you are not responsible for the carbon costs of the production, but you are, within your Scope 2, responsible for the use of the electricity. So that's your Scope 2 emission. And Scope 3, to keep it simple, is pretty much everything else within your supply chain. Okay, so those are the Scope 1, the Scope 2, and the Scope 3 emissions. So you get together with something like the Science Based Targets Institute, you go and you publish what you're intending to achieve and by when. They register it. And then you go to a company like the Carbon Disclosure Project, or CDP. So what CDP does is allows you as a corporation, they're made for this, they allow you as a corporation to publish on their books, their records, for tracking by, amongst other things, investment companies. And this is a big deal because investors are looking to invest in green energy. And so as a corporation, if you can show a good track record of clean energy, of carbon reductions, you're far more likely to be invested in. And of course, every corporation wants to be invested in. I have another slide on that as far as the actual dollar amount is concerned a little later on. So those are the two pieces. First, you set a plan. Second, you publish that plan. And these are an example of two institutions that help you do that. So you've got a plan. After you have your plan, or perhaps in conjunction with the plan, you need to measure what your current footprint is. So you need to establish a baseline, because if you don't measure, you can't improve, right? You can't go back and say, look, we've done this much in this amount of time. So what can you measure? What are some of the things that you as a corporation can look at to determine what your current carbon footprint is? This extends perhaps a little bit beyond IT, but it gives some food for thought. So look at some of the things here. So first of all, the title. There's not just electricity usage. There's construction, there's manufacturing, there's operations, and there's end of life. I learned something as I was going through my studies of carbon emissions. There's a carbon, CCC, Carbon in Construction Calculator. It's an online tool that tells you how much carbon is going to be used in construction of a facility based on the materials and some other things that are used. So it's not just, this is how much I'm burning from my servers, although servers are clearly a part of that. Networking, lighting, cooling, building, the stuff down here. So cooling refrigerant. Cooling refrigerant will leak over time from your chillers, from your air conditioners. And the refrigerant is far more toxic to the environment than just straight CO2, something like 5,000 times more, meaning that a kilogram of R22 that gets leaked over time is the equivalent of 5 kilograms of CO2. So you'll often see something equated to CO2, or it'll be a CO2 equivalent. You'll see that CO2 with a small e. So all of that are things we need to consider in a carbon footprint, but what can we look at? Let's take a look at IT equipment. Where can you get your data from? There are, and before we go into detail on this, here's the message. You are unlikely to get a perfect record of everything that you're using as far as, or everything that's generating carbon emissions. And that's okay. Don't let perfection be the enemy of good. So someone once said that we don't need 1 million organizations or individuals doing sustainability perfectly. What we need is 10 million organizations doing a mediocre job of it to make actual progress, and I think that's true. So even if you can't get a perfect record of what you're doing sustainability-wise or your carbon emissions, that's okay. Focus on what you can get and use that for your reporting and improve as you go along. Server rack power data. Go to your server racks. See what power, what wattage is being drawn by that particular rack. Same thing with UPS. We won't go through this in detail, but just a few things to call out. Server manufacturer power data. Pretty much every major manufacturer, and I'll show you an example from Dell, publishes what their servers consume over the lifetime. And it's a good benchmark to have in deciding what servers you're going to use and in reporting on that server's consumption. DC operations. Again, you guys will have a copy of these slides, so we don't need to go into detail. But if there's anything that jumps out at you that you want to ask about, we have some good brain power here, and I'm excluding myself, in the audience that can help answer these questions. Okay? Construction manufacturing, less of an IT thing, more focusing on IT equipment and DC operations. Your DC information management system is usually a very good source. And if you keep it consistent, you can see where that's going over time. You can prove your reductions. Right? So that's measurement. I promised that I would show you something about a server. This is a Dell R640. You take a look at the pie chart. Yes, there's some emissions, some inbuilt carbon that we need to take a look at in end-of-lifing, in transportation, and in the manufacture, of course. It takes something to manufacture it. And the components are broken down by their carbon usage. But by far, the biggest usage is the power consumed in its lifetime, which is why we focus on how to reduce that power consumption and track the power consumption. Okay, does that all make sense as far as the measurement is concerned? Any questions or thoughts on that? No? Oh, Rory, yeah?
I'm just going to chip something.
Please.
I attended a session earlier this week where they said that this is true, and they've done a lot of research, this particular company. This is true across all data center equipment, cloud equipment, etc. What I hadn't known and what was new and useful was that end user devices are flipped almost exactly the other way around.
Meaning what?
Meaning, so 70+% of data center devices, the carbon over their lifetime is their usage. For end users, 70% of your iPhone, Android phone, whatever, is the manufacturer.
I can see that.
And only 30% is usage, end of life, recycling.
Probably because it's a tighter cycle, right? People try to get rid of their phones more, not try to get rid, they want the newest more often, whereas from a corporate perspective, let's try to make that last as long as possible, which has its pros and cons as well, because newer servers are generally more carbon efficient than older servers, so at some point there's going to be a balance between cost and the carbon emissions. Good point, thank you. Anyone else? Okay. This is not a scan thing. Just out of curiosity, and feel free, speak up. What do you think your organization's largest contributor is to carbon emissions, depending on what you're doing? Anyone? What do you think VMware's is, our largest contribution to carbon emissions? Travel? I thought so too. That was my take. Now we actually, I should know this because it's probably it will be in our 2030, our 2030 documentation and published in carbon accounting. So VMware, travel. Anyone else? What do you feel that your biggest emission is? Is it servers over time? From a corporate perspective, based on what your corporation does, is it something else? Logistics, burning fuel? We're going to pause till someone puts up their hand.
Well, it's very industry specific, isn't it?
It is very industry specific.
I spoke to a group of people from different industries, and just one example that I remember from
Please.
the conversation was a large logistics company, global logistics company, and they said data center stuff is almost a rounding error compared to flights and lorries.
I believe that.
And that's the same for Amazon. They specifically state that AWS is huge, but their distribution is gargantuan.
Is by far more the carbon emissions. So the learning on that, or I think the messaging then should be, if it's something that as an IT community we can't necessarily control, that's okay. We need to control what we can, right? We can control the IT community. We can't necessarily control what the lorries are doing, right? So make improvements where we can. You can see that IT, we are responsible, and we are going to be responsible apparently for 64% of the world's electrical consumption if we carry on by 2040. So we can make a difference, and we should make a difference in that. Anyone else? Rob? Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
It's a question.
Yeah.
Do corporations count their end users part of these energy costs? And what about working from home?
Yeah. So the question was,
Count those numbers?
did everyone hear that? Okay. So do corporations factor in their end users? Absolutely. And it's sometimes a strange thing, right? So when you do your carbon accounting, there are pros for something that can have what are called rebound effects, meaning that you don't have to, you can shop from home, great. And that means that you don't have as many cars commuting into shops because Amazon allows you to go and order things. So everyone's like, woohoo! But the rebound effect is you have more trucks, more lorries on the road. You have people doing more shopping because it's easier to do, and that needs to be factored in as well. And so things like that, the short answer is yes, organizations do, but it needs to be fully accounted for. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, well, I'm more interested in if you've got 90% of your workforce working from home, they're not drawing power from sitting at a desk in an organisation. They're using their own power, yeah, and they're not travelling.
But
how do you reconcile those?
and it's a really good question. And in some cases, it's hard to account for what the individuals are using. They're not using corporate power, but let's say you're working from an office that's using 100% green power, right? And now you have 90% of your workforce working from home where they may not be using green power. So are you improving on that? It's very hard to quantify that specifically, which again goes back to do the best you can as far as getting your numbers are concerned, because it'll be very difficult to get a perfect count. But it's a very, very valid point and valid question, and something that is considered in carbon accounting. Paul, did you want to add to that?
Just to tackle that one,
Yeah.
it's about shuffling where the carbon goes. Because you've shuffled that, and you've shuffled it to, I don't know, the network suppliers. Because that's suddenly an inefficient way of talking. You're suddenly putting huge demands on your broadband, blah, blah, blah. You can't, simple science really, you can't get something from nothing.
No, true.
It's just shuffling the decks, and it's about trying to do it in the most.
Yeah, I was wondering if it was a way companies could
Bless you.
declare that they're using less energy by having people working from home.
Well, yes, they could. And not only could they,
I'm not saying that we would do it.
yeah, not only could they, I mean, companies do, right? So it becomes what's real?
Yeah.
Like, how much are the real savings in that? So there's something else over here.
It's also the view of the company. We commissioned a new building 10 or so years ago, and the argument was we couldn't have online generators because we were green. And then you go, we've seen what we do 100 yards that way. And look, so our shiny new building is green. We couldn't have generators, but we make an awful lot of mugs somewhere else.
The interesting thing with that, I mean, it's completely true, right? The interesting thing with that is companies are becoming more and more cognizant of it because of this visibility that is being placed. And it's good. It's great that visibility is being placed on sustainability. Obviously, that's a good thing. But then you get, oh, you know what? Like the whole, remember the whole Volkswagen thing, right? Like, oh yeah, we're going to fiddle with our numbers to make us look, and that kind of backfired, didn't it? Right? And so it's interesting to hear that, but I completely agree that you have to track realistically where that carbon is being, to use Paul's term, shuffled to. And in some cases, the shuffling is good because it goes to greener, the energy that's being used, instead of being here, but that energy is more green than it might have been elsewhere.
I mean, I heard a story the other day about motorway services providing electric car chargers, but what they're doing is they're actually running diesel generators because they can't get a big enough supply. Right? So that
Ironic.
Yeah, they're completely different.
Completely ironic. And so we have to be really careful, and that's a wider electric car argument. I'm a fan of electric cars, but there is another element to it. Okay. Thank you all. I love having this discussion, so we'll keep this up. Okay, so, Rob, you heard me say I'm going to move on,
You
right?
mentioned that we can't impact the lorries moving around, and we're probably already organisation planning, routing of
That is completely true.
Load management's a big one.
And there are algorithms for that specifically as a result of, hey, we IT, we need to lower carbon emissions. Thank you. Yeah, Sam.
Our industry is very unique. It's network rail, and we have thousands of partners, including VMware. Is it right to ask them a report about how they, their goals in terms of green energy? Before we actually
Absolutely. So for those who didn't hear the question, from an organization, in this case Network Rail, is it right for Network Rail to ask its partners what their goals are from a carbon emissions perspective? Not only is it permitted to do so, it's something that behooves an organization to do because we talked about Scope 3 emissions, and your Scope 3 emissions are going to be, to a certain degree, a large degree, the sum of your partner's Scope 1 or Scope 2 emissions, right? So it's going to adversely affect you if you partner with a company that has a very poor green track record. And I'll show you some numbers on that in a little bit. But it's a very real thing. So yes, everyone, when you're choosing your partner, choose a green partner because it's going to adversely affect you, which in turn adversely affects your financial bottom line and makes you less attractive to investors. So yes, it's a good question and it's a real thing. Does it answer the question, Sam? Okay. Thank you. Okay, so we've talked about planning, we talked about measuring, and now it's time to execute. So we have our benchmark. What can we do to reduce those carbon emissions? We're going to talk about 4 things, and I'm absolutely happy to go beyond that or to drill into any one of these. First and foremost, and to this audience it probably won't come as a huge surprise, is virtualization. Now, when we did this for the British Computer Society, not everyone is necessarily as virtualized as some of the folks here at a VMware conference, right, to be fair. And I know that organizations are at different levels of virtualization. Some are 50, 60, maybe 70, maybe 80%, which is great, but look at the difference this can make. So this is a graph from 2003 to 2019. So again, it's slightly older data, but just from virtualization alone, the numbers are still astonishing me. 130 million servers not deployed because virtualization managed to avoid those. 2.1 million gigawatt hours avoided. And this third one, 1.2 billion metric tons of CO2 equivalent avoided just through virtualization technologies. In the last bit here, that was 3.6% of global CO2 emissions in 2019. Right, those are huge, huge numbers. So to put people on the spot from within your own organization, how many are, let's start with 50% virtualized? 60? 70? 80? Well done, sir. 90?
At least.
Okay. No one's 100%. Oh, okay then. 95. I'll take 95. But you can see where a percentage, just moving that up, moving that bar up by just a few percent, has tremendous impact. So what I'm going to ask here's a spoiler alert. When I've gone through all 4 of these, I'm going to have us judge what makes the most sense to your organization, what is going to have the greatest impact in reducing your carbon emissions. So virtualization, probably the biggest hit, right? The biggest bang for the buck. But cloud providers, again, I recognize that not everyone can move to cloud. There are regulatory reasons you might not be able to. It could be taking, Joe mentioned this, it could be taking longer than planned to move to cloud. But the simple fact is, at scale, hyperscalers are going to do, in general, a far, far better job of helping you reduce carbon emissions or running a data center more efficiently than you can do in-house at scale. And we're talking about at scale, right? So you take a look at some of the numbers. I know it's a little hard to read, so I'll call it out. So AWS, our infrastructure is 3.6 times more efficient, more energy efficient than the median of US surveyed companies, and 5 times more efficient than the average across EMEA. That's a big thing, and they're very much en route to green power. Not to put AWS on the spot, but how green?
Very green.
There you go. So likewise, Microsoft. Carbon benefits of cloud computing. This is a 2018 study, so this is even going back a few years. Microsoft Azure Cloud Platform can be up to 93% more energy efficient and up to 98% more carbon efficient than on-prem solutions. Cloud providers can do a more efficient job. What that means for you is that if you can move some of your workload to cloud, you can realize some of those carbon benefits. Okay, so virtualization, moving to cloud. Number 3, improving workload efficiency. So this is a grab from our ARIA operations, formerly vRealize operations, which is doing amazing things to help organizations recognize a number of things, but here's where it helps as far as carbon is concerned. It helps you improve your workload efficiency. 10 minutes? Okay, thank you. Helps you improve your workload efficiency. So how many of you are users of ARIA operations? Okay, good. So you know some of this already. It helps you find unused resources, zombie VMs, orphan disks that are just hanging around, taking up space, being inefficient. And that inefficiency, over time, or not even over time, it interferes with, or not interferes, it drags down your, or increases your carbon emissions, drags down your efficiency. So when you take a look at improving workload efficiency, here are, I'm sorry, let me back up. This is another chart also of ARIA operations that shows you what you could reclaim. And on the first slide, it also equates it with how much you'll save per month. So there's a direct, this is the nice thing about being carbon efficient and reducing your emissions. It has a direct tie-in with savings, right? You use less energy, you are greener, and hey, surprise, you save money. And so there's a financial incentive for organizations as well. So in addition to and in conjunction with improving workload efficiency is increasing utilization. So, oh, I almost said VROps. It's almost like saying VMworld. ARIA operations does a very good job in showing you how much you have left of a resource. When are you going to run out of CPU? When are you going to run out of memory? When are you going to run out of storage? And if you have a big project coming down the pipe, you can do a what-if analysis saying, this is how much I'm going to need. Let's plug it in and see if I'm going to need to buy more servers. Because I'm sure we've all seen this. The business comes and says, we need 10 VMs. Each one needs to have 8 CPUs and 64 gigs of RAM. You're like, yeah, no, you don't. Like, oh, yeah, we do. This will help you disprove that. And also, there's no, when we're talking about reducing, we're talking about reducing the number of servers and increasing the utilization on those servers. There's no excuse, either financially or from a carbon accounting perspective, from a green perspective, to buy more equipment if you have equipment that will work and can support what you currently have if you just make it a little tighter. Okay, I think that is a truism. So those are the 4 things. Virtualize, move to cloud, what you can, improve efficiency, and improve utilization. So any thought? Let's do this a second time. It's the same link. Any thought? And sorry, let me bring up the second thing. I'll break out of this. Go over here. So again, thank you for the first one. Oh, do you need the barcode again?
Easier.
Is it still there from the first time? Okay, let me back up then. Hang on. And I'll make it bigger. Go ahead and scan that again, and it's going to be the second quiz. Everyone's got that? No, it's okay.
Still the first one.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Keep it scanned. I'll move it to the second one when everyone has got the barcode. We're good? Okay. So let me go here, and let's do number 2. Okay, so it should be on your screens now. All right, let's see what we got.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
I'm just curious, do you think the move to cloud also involves virtualization? Is that what they're comparing it to? So you have a physical server on-prem, but you move that workload to the cloud and put it in a virtual machine?
It's a good question. So the question was, if you move to cloud, does that also include the benefits of virtualization, assuming you're taking a physical workload and moving it to cloud? Or, so I think the answer is it would give a bigger bang for buck, but it also says, it also factors in if you have a virtual machine on-prem and you're taking that virtual machine or application set of virtual machines and moving that to cloud, you're still getting benefits. So it factors both of those in. Cormac, does that answer the question?
Yep.
Okay. Rory?
Just my experience of the research I've seen, customers I've talked to, is it's actually 3 and 4 are much more effective because you know, if you're AWS, you're working at 93-94% utilization, whereas on-prem, most people are working 50 at best.
So it's interesting.
That's the
Sorry.
difference.
Sorry, Rory.
No, sorry, go ahead.
So I mean, it's interesting to see that. Yes, Paul, but I want to move on too. Go ahead.
Very quickly.
Yep.
If you move to cloud, press the cloud button, a lot of people think it's gone. And what they then don't do is they don't focus on making those workloads efficient. So whilst it is technically more efficient, the end-to-end ROI...
They don't worry about the...
Precisely. They try and make it someone else's problem and walk away. So I've got some real customers with real data that closes the gap. So I think the tagline is a well-managed private cloud can be as efficient, if not more efficient. The reality is most people don't have well-managed either.
I agree with that.
Because it feels
Nope.
like what you'd leave behind and what you don't. And
Yeah.
when it's not one cloud, but 4 or 5,
Yeah.
you suddenly...
No efficiency with the scale because of concentration risk.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not interrupting. No, we're and it's a we knew we were going to do this, right? So this is totally good. I know the guy's going to come in and like wave a sign at me in a second. So it's a totally valid point. Totally valid point. Okay, so we're reporting. Now we've gone and we've taken steps, hopefully all of them, or one that makes the biggest impact. We saw that increasing efficiency was a big one. So what do you do to report that? Well, I'll build the slide out. There are a number of established organizations for corporations to report their carbon reductions. And remember, this is a big thing. This is not just a little casual, oh, hey, let's report that. This is a big thing because it has real financial implications and soon is going to be regulated. So the institutions that I put up here all have different slants. For example, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, you know why you need an acronym for that. That's just hard to say. Clearly, they're interested in the carbon efficiency as it relates to what it does for the financial implications of a corporation. SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, to which VMware reports, amongst many others, establishes a framework for carbon accounting. And again, this is becoming more of a science. We talked about the CDP, the Carbon Disclosure Project, but all of these, some of which offer stickers proving or commendations, so allowing you to go and put on your signature and your corporate work what you've done and how well you're doing in your sustainability goals. Sorry?
Are they global or...
These are global, yeah. Yeah. And I would be remiss to not point out what, again, ARIA Operations is capable of doing as far as helping you internally. Now the others, whereas the others are global established organizations, this is something that you can do yourselves internally, which makes a big difference because you can use ARIA Operations to publish a green score. And it breaks it down into clean demand, lean operations, green supply, which further breaks it down into some other sub-pieces. The great thing about it is you can put together dashboards. It comes with dashboards. You can fine-tune things like everything else in ARIA Operations. And you can show this to your C-level. And it's a benchmark. It's not necessarily a benchmark between your organization and your peers, because everyone will measure things slightly differently. And so this example, green score, we're 47% green. You can't go and say, we're 47% green and our competitor is only 32% green. We might get there as we standardize what that measurement looks like, but what you can absolutely do is say, today we're 47% green, and then 3 weeks from now, or 2 months from now, or a year from now, now we're 73% green, along the same measurement benchmark, right? So you can show this to CEOs, and this makes a very, very big difference. And so for those of you, and I know there are a number from our chat earlier, from our hands up earlier, that use ARIA Operations, this is a great use of a tool that you already have to demonstrate how you're combating your carbon emissions, okay? Any thoughts or questions on that? I know I said we're time constrained, and we are, but still, I appreciate the conversation.
You've got
We're
to
good?
feed in the right data, though, haven't you, for that? So
Yep.
How do I
Yep.
feed it?
Data, shit data in, shit data out, right? So yes, you do.
We can ask people.
This is the slide I was talking about earlier that puts a financial flavor to green scores. So this is from CDP. I lifted the slide for a presentation I gave a while back. So on the left are the investor assets. Bear in mind this is a couple of years old. These numbers are probably greater. So 110 trillion is the amount of investment dollars that investment organizations are looking to invest in green companies. If your company's not green, what happened to my 5?
I thought I'd let you.
No worries, thank you. All right, we got a couple minutes. We're good, we're good. And so 110 trillion, if you want to get some of that 110 trillion, it behooves you to be green. And this goes to the question that we had earlier from Sam, the 5.5 billion in purchasing power. If you are going to partner with someone, or if you want to be partnered with, it behooves you to be green so you get that partnership, because if you're not doing good green things, then someone else who's looking to reduce their carbon emissions is probably not going to invest in you. Is there a question at the back or no? Is that just a stretch? Okay. Okay, last, very briefly, I'm going to talk about a journey. This is VMware's journey. We have published, in 2020, we started with a 30 by 30. So our goals in ESG, Joe was mentioning ESG, so environmental, social, and governance, of which we have our 2030 goals broken down into sustainability, equity, and trust. So from a sustainability perspective, these are our 10 goals. The link here at the bottom, it's actually very interesting to read. I mean, I'm not just saying this because I'm VMware. Many corporations have this. Broadcom has this as well, separate from VMware. The two will presumably merge. So having a read of that, or the categories in which we're reporting and the progress made, is an interesting and inspiring, honestly, inspiring read. This is our journey way back from 1998 with just 5 people to now where we have more than 37,000 people. And it's a few interesting things to call out on this that I like. So carbon, here, I'll use my little thing again. So carbon certified neutral in 2018, which was several years ahead of schedule. We were very pleased with that. What else is, there's a lot of 100% renewable energy powered by 2019. I talked about the science-based targets where we registered with SBTI, part of the Dow Jones Sustainability Indices, and then getting kudos. So the CDP A-list for climate, EcoVadis, giving you that little sticker that you can put on your corporate signatures. The European Green Digital Coalition, I actually sit as part of VMware on the European Commission, where we discuss what constitutes a green solution, how corporations can bring those in and use them to reduce carbon emissions. So one example of this that's not on here, but when we talk about doing things green and sustainability, back in the days of VMworld, when it really was VMworld, I attended one in San Francisco. I don't remember how many years ago it was, but as many of you know, VMworld, the attendees get breakfast, then they get lunch, right? And so that's a lot of plastic cutlery, forks, knives, spoons. Some brilliant soul had the idea. At some point, we all came in, and instead of plastic, they were made of potato ware, right? So potatoes formed into forks, knives, spoons, completely compostable, very good for the environment. And just think, over the span of the 4 or 5, whatever days that VMworld lives, and the 10, 20, 30,000 attendees, that's a huge savings. It's not IT related, but it sort of is, because it's an IT conference. Just things like that can go a long way to carbon savings. Okay, I'll build this out. To show that this is working, this is an example. Different companies, I can't name them all, but these are examples of corporations that are working with VMware to achieve tangible carbon reduction, or meet their goals, achieve tangible carbon reductions. So 4,149 tons of carbon avoided. The second one, energy and carbon efficient infrastructure and operations, 10% VMs reclaimed. So this is use of RE operations. This is a large telco in France. That's all I can say about that. Renewable energy-powered cloud, sustainable data distributed workforce, going to, what are our green savings going to be if we can empower our employees to work remotely? Okay? Stop. Okay. So that is actually the takeaways here. It's impossible to reduce the carbon footprint. Execute those 4 methods that I mentioned. Choose one and be the champion of that method within your organization. Make that difference. Be that small group of committed citizens.